As Donald Trump is preparing his new team, there are apprehensions across the world over how his actions will change geopolitical equations.
But closer home, Pentagon is worried. Current and former officials are deeply concerned that Trump could initiate a widespread purge of military leadership and career civil servants.
Now, during his previous term, Trump routinely clashed with the Pentagon brass, including his own former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, who he suggested could be executed for treason. Further concerns focus on current chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General C.Q. Brown, respected for his apolitical stance.
Now, in his second presidency, Donald Trump is expected to take a new approach towards the military leaders, particularly those who have been outspoken critics of his policies. Culture war issues could be a flashpoint, as Trump has vowed to rid the military of so-called woke generals focused on racial and social justice.
Moreover, Trump has hinted at deploying the military for a range of domestic priorities, from mass deportations of undocumented immigrants to quelling civil unrest. Such proposals have alarmed military experts who warn that using the armed forces against American citizens could not only violate laws but also turn the public against the revered institution.
Now, as the United States braces for a Trump 2.0, the halls of the Pentagon are rife with apprehension. The specter of a purge looms large, with career civil servants especially, and military officers fearing that they may become collateral damage as the commander-in-chief takes charge.
For more on this, we are now being joined live by Colonel David B. DeRoche from Washington, D.C. He is a professor at the Near East South Asia Center for Strategic Studies, National Defense University, and a defense and strategic expert. Colonel, thank you so much for joining us. Always a pleasure having you here with us on the show. So, during Trump's previous term as well, he routinely clashed with the Pentagon brass. Do you feel this term will start exactly where the last one ended?
Yeah, I don't think that the clashes were while he was in the presidency. I think it was once he was out of the presidency. So, basically when Trump fired Mark Esper as Secretary of Defense and then left office, after he left office, you started to hear stories about General Milley and Esper conspiring to hide the nominations of two women to be four-star generals to kick that back beyond President Trump so that they could be done. But there weren't many stories of clashes. You did have Jim Mattis, a retired Marine Corps general who was Secretary of Defense, resigned because he felt that Trump was abandoning the Kurds in Syria. But there wasn't really much in the way of outright conflict. So I think that narrative is a little bit incorrect. But, Trump talks a lot of smack. He's a very undisciplined speaker, and there's no doubt in my mind that he's been unhappy with what General Milley in particular has been saying since he left office. So there's a possibility of friction there. I have to say there's not a whole lot of Milley supporters in the Pentagon today. So I think this is a little overblown.
Colonel David, very interestingly, Donald Trump has vowed to rid the military of the so-called woke generals. What does it mean? What does that entail? How do you think it will impact the Pentagon? And isn't that contradictory to his campaign pitch?
Well, it's not contradictory to his campaign pitch. It was part of his campaign pitch, which was that under the Biden administration, all the institutions of government had been twisted away from their primary purpose to serve the interests of the Biden administration and the Democratic Party. And so I think that I'm not quite sure what it means. It is important to note that the military is at the front of the culture wars because people have always tried to, if you take acceptance of homosexuals, for example, that was viewed as a crime 30, 40 years ago, and then was viewed as a sort of minority position even 15 years ago. But once the military had to do them, the military, when they get a mission, whether it's racial integration or something, they do it. I think he's referring to two things. I think the first thing is, I think he thinks that there are some officers who may have been promoted beyond their abilities because they're a member of one of these groups that the Biden administration is very conscious of. And I think that the primary example there is not really a military officer, it's the Surgeon General of the United States who wears a military uniform. It looks like an admiral's uniform, but she is actually in the Department of Health and Human Services and was assigned male at birth and is now a woman. So I think that's probably the only target I can directly look at. There has long been a suspicion and anecdotal talk that some officers have been promoted beyond their abilities. You may seek to reverse that, but honestly, that is a little bit too far in the weeds for a general.
Colonel, also, since you're on the show, I want to take this opportunity and get your expertise on how Trump plans to solve the wars or at least bring peace in these regions. I want to take your opinion on, especially on the Russia-Ukraine front. There were reports which were suggesting, none of the sides have confirmed, but the reports suggest that there is talk with Putin, that they get to have the territories that they have already ceded, that they have already taken over, and Ukraine needs to make peace with whatever has been given away or whatever Russia has already taken over. At this point, they'll have European soldiers on that buffer line, and US continues to support Ukraine with military support, military hardware. How do you see this situation playing out? This is what the reports are suggesting so far.
Yeah, I'm not sure what to make of those reports. I mean, if I were to evaluate them and brief the president, I would say, okay, first, you're planning on Europeans to secure this. They'll do it for maybe 5 years, but then they're going to leave. Yes. And it's either the Ukrainians or us. That's kind of how the Europeans roll. The second thing is, I think when you look at Ukraine, the Donbass is where all of Ukraine's heavy industry is located. So if you give the Donbass to Putin, which is what you'd be doing, you're left with a country that, quite frankly, it would be difficult for them to be economically sustainable. So they would have to be supported by the West almost indefinitely. But I think the bigger point is, and this is my point of view, there is no such thing as a lasting peace with Putin in Ukraine or indeed in the former Soviet Union. What you'll get would be a 5-year period in which Russia reorganizes, rearms itself, and then Putin would cite some other pretext, free trade agreement with the European Union. And I think that the Poles in particular, who have been directly threatened, who have been told by Putin, you're next. And Trump has great relations with the Poles. Recall in his administration, they wanted to build a base called Fort Trump in Poland to have U.S. troops there. They're going to say, no, that's just not going to work. So it sounds plausible in theory, and I know that there are a lot of people who want to see an end to the war, who think this is a reasonable settlement. But I think when you pencil it out, it's not a viable prospect. And I think that it'd be hard to find somebody with a security background who would see this as a viable course of action.
Okay. Colonel Davis, thank you so much for your time and for joining us on the show today.
Thank you.